All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating today. We're unpacking a really famous, kind of chilling prophecy, the idea that the end of the world will be just like the days of Noah. But what does that actually mean? Well, the source material we're looking at today suggests the answer isn't what you might think, and it has everything to do with what we're paying attention to, or maybe what we're not.
So this is the quote that kicks the whole thing off. It's a direct comparison made by Jesus himself. And, most of us, we hear that, and we immediately focus on the flood part, the big disaster. But the text we're exploring argues that's a huge mistake. The real warning, the absolute heart of this prophecy, is hidden in those last three words. They were unaware.
So that begs the question, right? What were the days of Noah really like? Was it just total chaos and wickedness everywhere you looked? Our source suggests the reality was way more subtle, and maybe even looked kind of normal on the surface. It argues the real danger wasn't the disaster itself, but the atmosphere, the whole vibe of the world that let it happen completely unnoticed.
Okay, so first up, this is a prophecy of the end. The core idea here is that the story of Noah isn't just some ancient history lesson. Nope, it's a template, a blueprint for understanding the state of the world right before a major divine judgment.
And this really gets to the heart of the argument. It's not that people will be running around being cartoonishly evil. It's not they'll be so caught up in their day-to-day lives, so focused on the material world, that they become spiritually blind. They literally won't even recognize God's judgment when it's happening right in front of their faces. So, what is it that actually triggers a judgment like this? Well, according to our source, there's this kind of spiritual tipping point, a moment when sin becomes so normal, so widespread, that a line gets crossed. And this concept is absolutely key to the entire analysis. It suggests judgment isn't just random or arbitrary. It's a direct response to a society hitting a spiritual point of no return, a point where sin isn't just something that happens. It's become the default setting.
And we see this pattern play out first in the story of Noah itself. The text doesn't just say there was some wickedness, it says it had become great on the earth. The scales had absolutely, definitively tipped.
Then you've got the really strange case of the Amorites. God explicitly says he's delaying judgment for hundreds of years. Why? Because their sin had not yet reached its full measure. It's like he's watching a spiritual hourglass, and the sand hadn't run out just yet. And just look at the language used for Sodom and Gomorrah. The outcry against them was great, their sin grievous. You see, it's that exact same tipping point terminology, signaling that the time for intervention had finally come. And all of this builds to the final, stunning parallel. Prophecy about the end times uses the exact same language, sins piled up to heaven. The source presents this as a clear, unmistakable pattern, a huge warning sign.
Okay, so what kind of sins are we talking about here? What actually pushes a society over that edge? Our source really digs into the anatomy of this fallen world, and the breakdown is pretty interesting.
The analysis basically splits these sins into two main buckets. First, the obvious societal sins that you can actually see, and second, the deeper spiritual sins of the heart. Let's start with those societal ones. So in this category, three things really stand out. First, just a general godless living, people going about their business with zero thought for any higher purpose. Second, pure lust and greed, just living for selfish satisfaction. And third, something that has sparked debate for centuries, a very specific kind of forbidden marriage. And this takes us into one of the Bible's great mysteries. Genesis talks about these sons of God marrying human women. Who were they? Fallen angels? Ancient kings? Well, our source material takes a very firm and very clear stance on this.
Now, the theory you've probably heard, the really popular one, is that these were fallen angels. But this analysis says, nope, not at all. It argues for a purely human explanation. The sons of God was simply the term for the righteous family line of Seth, who started marrying into the worldly family line of Cain, and in doing so, completely erased the line between what was sacred and what was profane.
And it backs this up with two really solid points. First, it says, look, angels are spiritual beings, they can't physically reproduce. But second, and this is a real head-scratcher for the angel theory, the Nephilim, their supposed giant offspring, are actually mentioned as existing after the flood. How is that even possible if they were all wiped out? But you know what's crazy? All those societal sins, they weren't even the biggest problem. The analysis points to a much deeper, spiritual sin that was the most damning of all. It wasn't about what they did, it was about what they refused to hear. In Genesis chapter 6, this number pops up, 120 years. Now, a lot of people think this means God was limiting the human lifespan, but our source text says, hold on,
and proposes a completely different way to understand this number.
Here's the key insight. The 120 years wasn't a punishment, it was a grace period. It was a final century-long alarm bell. For all that time, Noah was out there, building the ark, preaching a warning, and giving everyone a very long, very loud chance to change course.
And this brings us to the climax, the real gut punch of the whole argument. What was the ultimate tragedy of ignoring that 120-year warning? It wasn't just simple disobedience. It was the effect it had on their minds, on their whole perception of reality.
The argument is this. When your life is completely soaked in worldly things, eating, working, marrying, all without any thought of a higher purpose, it's like you're trying to see through muddy water. It clouds your vision. You completely lose the ability to see the writing on the wall, to interpret events from any perspective other than your own immediate physical one.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that first quote. The flood wasn't some secret ambush. The warning was out there, loud and clear, for 120 years. The ultimate tragedy wasn't the flood itself, but the fact that when it finally came, people were so spiritually blind that they were totally, completely unaware of what was happening.
And this is the final, absolutely chilling parallel. The ultimate danger isn't just that disasters will happen. It's that when they do, a spiritually blind world will just explain them away. They'll call it climate change, a stock market crash, political chaos, bad luck. They will see everything except the warning. And so they'll just carry on, business as usual, exactly like they did in the days of Noah.
And so, the source material leaves us with this final, really powerful question. What's the greater danger? The disaster that's coming, or being completely unaware of what that disaster actually means? It really shifts the whole focus, from fearing the storm to asking ourselves if we can even see the clouds that are gathering.